I'm doing the intro.
This
This is the intro. We're
yeah.
live.
Hey,
This is mid-season form. Welcome in to the first edition of the 2022 Rice Football Blue and Gray Preview Show. We're here to talk this season about the games coming up front. I got joining me this week and always forever for the first time since December, JP Heath, Rice Owls voice of the Owls on the radio and the interwebs and everywhere in between. What have you been doing in the past 8 months since we've chatted live? Basketball, picked up any new hobbies?
just living life, man. Just seizing the day, carpe diem, calling a lot of Rice Owls basketball and baseball. I'm sure you know that's part of the other job duties too, hosting podcasts for Brother Pillin in the off season. But man, just living life and not being able to prep for USC. Other than that, that's my first of many passive aggressive shots. So
this is good. No, there's nobody here from USC to defend themselves. And so I'm going to set the stage here and I'm going to tee you up a little bit because we're going to start with a little bit behind the curtain. I promise we're going to get to Rice. We're going to get to USC, but part of the world we live in now starts with the University of Texas and Steve Sarkisian, who announced this week that he was not going to issue a depth chart for the time being. There would be no depth charts at the University of Texas, which I thought I'd never heard a coach say before. And then we went into prep week here, and Rice has told me that a depth chart is forthcoming. So hopefully we'll have a depth chart from the Owls. And if nothing else, we've been out at practice and we can tell you who is lining up because we've seen it with our eyes. But it is a couple days from USC. USC has not issued a public depth chart, and their entire team, more or less, was brought in from the transfer portal. So it's not like you can look at last season. So how do we feel about the fact that we have a team of completely new players with no depth chart, new head coach, new quarterback, new running back, new wide receivers, new corners, new linebacker? Did I cover everything?
The ball's on the tee there. And it's been a while since my JV baseball playing days at Commerce High School, but you set up a big homer here. It is totally Bush League. It's totally unprofessional. It was the Longhorns that did it recently that caught news. But it started a few years ago with Harbaugh in Michigan, and it's only going to get worse and worse with this dumb age of college athletics we are, with no governance, where these people can just transfer at a whim. You get me riled up, Matthew. And it's very indicative of a bigger problem where these coaches have all the power and they can do exactly whatever they want to do. And what they don't know, what they don't care about is it hurts the student athlete. But that's the history of the NCAA. They don't care about the student athlete as much as they impine anyway. That's often another different whole series of podcasts. But when I was doing Diboll High School football in 2002 to 2006, before I got moved up to the big time, Matthew, to do Lufkin High School. That's a whole other story. I've got to tell you that one off air. I would have to be my own PR guy and broadcast games the way I wanted to do, and I'd have to call and get depth charts. In high school, Matthew, this is what they would do. And it's ridiculous. It's, again, I'm putting it away. I can't control it. New JP, but I'll settle down here in a second. It's the most ridiculous, asinine thing. Yes, quote me on the record. It shouldn't happen, and it's a dangerous trend. Will my little diatribe do any good? No. So you're my therapist. It's over.
I'm here for you, JP. But I think just kind of completing your thought, it's important because, you're a Rice football fan. You're tuning in to watch us talk on the internet. You probably have not dug into the intricacies of USC. And the hope of the Rice Football Blue and Gray Preview Show this season is we can give you a little 30-minute lunchtime nugget. So you have, okay, these are kind of the guys that I need to watch for. This is what we can see with this team. We're not going to lie to you. We don't have as much as we would usually have on USC because they're being pretty cagey. So we're going to walk through a little bit. Obviously, they got some high-profile names that we can talk through, but this is just kind of a thing that depth charts and things like this are a service to people like us that are sitting here on the microphones so we can help people like you who are listening and want to know information. Let's be real. We know Mike Bloomgren. He's a smart guy. He's prepared for all of the players that are on the team. He's watched their tape. We talked to him about it in the press conference yesterday. There's nothing USC is going to do that's come out. It's like, gotcha. Jordan Addison is lining up on this side of the field versus this side of the field or in the slot. Like, come on.
Caleb Williams will probably take the first snap whenever USC has the ball. And I do have Rice's depth chart, but the way I understand it is USC might release one later on tonight to be able to get to that. So I had to shake my fist at that cloud. For those that know me, I don't take it personal. It doesn't matter to me, but it feels good to just get it out there and release it, Matthew. But, like you said, they've still got talent coming back, a few guys that played on both sides of the ball, so we can at least talk about that, control what we can control.
Yeah, and we're going to start with Rice, a couple kind of key pieces that we want to talk through about this season. Obviously, it starts at quarterback like it has for the umpteenth year with Rice, but for the first time since, you're going to have to correct me on this, the 2015 Dreyfus-Jackson years, Rice has a back-to-back opening day starter that wears the same jersey, same guy on the back. We got Wiley Green, and I think it's interesting. You got a phrase, and we will kind of put context around this season with the fact that this is a team that you get to year 3, year 4 of a rebuild like Rice was, and the goal was by the time you get to X, you've got a quarterback in place. You've got a offensive, defensive scheme in place. So I guess kind of smorgasbord, throwing it up to you. How do you kind of feel about where Rice is as a program entering this game against USC, kind of what they've done, what you've seen, and who they are going to be this year?
Well, like you hinted there, and like we talked a number of times in the offseason, it comes down to that quarterback consistency. What do they do? And having that, it's incumbent upon Wiley to play a lot better, he would admit. He told me some things, and I'll talk more on the broadcast about when I had a pretty candid talk with him, but he knows he has to stretch it downfield more in the field. And TJ McMahon really pressed him in that. I talked to both Wiley and TJ separately. Wiley had some other obligations. He had to duck out early at media day, but I had a really good talk with TJ, and we saw, we had a pretty good demo reel of him. And that performance coupled with the offseason, TJ working with a lot of the new receivers, which I'm sure we'll get to, that pressed Wiley, and I think Wiley pressed TJ. So in the end, I still think TJ will get a fair amount of snaps this season. You always have to have that depth, but and Marcus Tuiasosopo, homecoming for him. But he even told me last week that the competition all across the board on the offensive end had a big benefit to everybody, that in the depth that Coach Bloomgren mentioned in his presser, and he told me on the coaches show Monday night at Acme Oyster House, shameless plug there. So to me, it's the offense. Like we've seen Brian Smith these 4 years. I think last year was an anomaly. There are a lot of reasons why they gave up that many points. I think some of the offensive struggles lent to that. But on the offensive side, they've got to do better yards per carry. I've talked to Sanders Davis a couple of times in the offseason. They're happy with the depth of the offensive line. So to me, it starts with the offense in turn, and that focus is going to come to the quarterback. And we'll get to the running game in a second, but number 5, number 9, I guess 7 now. Yeah, I guess he changed his number. They've got to be better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to come down to that. And you mentioned the running game, the wide receivers. I think this is probably the most interesting part of the offense. Talking with Coach Tui, he said, this is the first year that I've really got to pick my guys and put in my stuff. He came in and it had a spring to kind of get adjusted, but last year was kind of a year 0, a year 0.51 for his, fingerprints on the offense. And we kind of saw some shifts. I joke about him all the time. I said, Tui, the year before you got here, Rice lined up with 5 wide receivers on the field twice, and both plays were flagged for penalties, so neither counted. And we saw last year, there was a lot more 5 wide. This year, probably thin on tight end, so I think you're going to see a lot of wide receivers on the field with their guys. And that's what's interesting about, I think, the Rice offense this year is it's almost, we talked about that progression, it's almost brand new to some degree, because you have Luke McCaffrey, who taking his first steps as a collegiate wide receiver. You have Bradley Rosner, who we haven't seen play more than 10 plays since 2019. You got Ced Patterson, you got Isaiah Esdale coming in from West Virginia, Tyson Thompson coming in from HBU. What led them in receiving was a really productive, shifty slot guy. So you got, Rice has only gone like 1 to 2 deep at the wide receiver core the past couple of years. You got 5 guys. And then running back Dean Connors is kind of the flashy name that brought in from the transfer ranks. So you got a quarterback who we've talked to, needs to make the jump. And you have 4, 5, 6 guys that weren't on this field last year, that each of them have the potential to be difference makers, which I think is big. So what's the next, what is it? Are you just kind of on like wait and see mode for this offense? Like, how do you kind of expect them, because USC is going to be a great litmus test. How do you think we'll see them kind of come together, and how much different is it going to look like on Saturday compared to maybe what we've seen before?
I think we'll know a little bit, and your intrepid reporting, you had a great question yesterday, and it brought up a point that I knew, but I hadn't thought about how well these Bloomgren teams have played in their openers the last 2 or 3 seasons. And I remember really giving that scare to Arkansas last year. I think, like I said earlier, I think they're going to throw the ball. This is not any insight. This is just by talking to some of the guys and piecing things together.
Saying Rice is going to throw the ball is news.
No, I think it'll be a lot more than fans expect. It's not going to be away from the intellectual brutality. They still want to set up that run, which obviously has to do a lot better. They've got 4 backs they're really comfortable with, starting with Ari Broussard. I was looking at last night, filling in some of the numbers. Ari Broussard averaged 5 yards per carry when he touched. So what's that like if you can expand his role some? Cam Montgomery, he had that great flurry and that whirling dervish into the season last year. What can he do? But I've seen enough of Connors to know that, okay, he was slowed by a bump in camp early on, but getting him back full speed down the line, what will that do? So having and Juma, the coaches have said, CJ Anderson talked to him, I think the very first day I was able to get to camp, and CJ Anderson told me that Juma is the healthiest he's ever been. So they have a deep core of running backs, but it comes down to setting that up where they can stretch the field and do it, because I think Wiley is a lot more mature, and he's a mature guy as it was. But having that deeper passing game with more receivers and a healthier receiver core, that should make for and remember, I was thinking a nugget you brought up last season, how they ended, and we talked about on this very format, how they ended the year offensively. They didn't have many problems scoring last year. So can they keep that up over an offseason? I don't believe in offseason momentum, but I think they do have that potential to. Newsflash, you have to score more than the other guys. So I think they do have that potential, yes.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. And as we I think that's a good place to transition over to the other side of the football, because I think you're right. I think in recent years, this was a defense that they finished like 12th in scoring defense in 2020 in that shortened season, had the shutout against Marshall. Obviously that went a lot into it, but was played really good hurt. And 2019 might have been their most complete season, going for an extended stretch of just playing really good defense. They had everybody healthy. So it's interesting. I talked with George Nyakwal, of all people, who you kind of think of as more of the quiet, soft-spoken leader. And he was throwing punches this offseason and during media days, because I was chatting with him and he said, almost like we're really underrated because nobody knows who we are. They haven't seen all these guys on the field at the same time. This is a secondary that's been, worn torn the last 2 seasons. We haven't had DeBraylon Carroll on the field, who is a huge difference maker, and you've been missing guys here and there. So I think it's almost going to be a similar story on defense, with almost just like hit a mulligan on last year. Now you got all the pieces back. Yeah, there are going to be some injuries, but maybe not that many injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And how well do you think these two sides of the ball can complement each other? In years it's been 85% defense with the offense trying to do just enough. Where do you think the balance is? Is it closer to even? And how big of a role will the defense still have on ultimately this team's success?
A lot, potentially. And I think that we don't know the answer to your penultimate question there. We won't know until we get a good swath of the schedule covered, But I think they have the potential, definitely. What does that mean? Doesn't mean as much now. Potential doesn't mean anything until you put up those wins in the left side of the column. The defensive line gives me a lot of comfort. I'm a huge O-line, D-line, trenches guy. If you're going to have any type of success, as we joked last year, General Manager JP, I probably will never be an NFL GM, but you've got to build it around the fronts, as they're trying to do on the offensive side of things. And they've said the O-line's a lot more improved. The defensive line, and Coach Bloom reiterated it as he has in the offseason, and talking to Cedric Calhoun just a week and a half ago or so, they feel that they're too deep across that defensive line. And Ikenna Nwachukwu is a monster and a half. He's going to be great. I talked to DeBraylon Carroll yesterday before the presser. I was like, Debo, how you feeling? He goes, they're going to know. They're going to know. Like, he is going full speed. So having that depth, Josh Piercy just named a captain. He's the leading returning tackler. Having a guy that plays that outside linebacker in that rush in spot. So they're going to be okay. When you can have Trey Schumann backing up at one defensive end, that's kind of misleading from the depth chart that eventually will be released. But all the defensive line is going to play a lot. They've got a lot of different packages to run in there too. But and the secondary's got experience now. That they will get beat sometimes, like every other secondary in the country, but they've got veteran guys in there. I'm really anxious. Gabe Taylor had a good freshman season. I guess technically freshman season. Sean Fresh, talked to him during the camp. So yeah, they've got a lot of promise, and I don't think anybody would argue the defense is the strongest part of the ball right now. I'd say, okay, you're such a high pressure guy, Matthew. I would say about right now, let's go 65-35. As far as the defense being the strongest point, but it all comes down to what they do on Saturdays in the fall.
Yes. And then I guess what I have circled when it comes to this particular game against USC and moving forward as we watch, I want to see, you mentioned the defensive line, I want to see how productive that front four can be, whoever's lined up on the line, plus probably Josh Piercy coming off the edge in some fashion, because that's been something that the Rice defense has been really good at a lot of things the past couple of seasons. They've improved through the air a ton. They've been a really good tackling team. It helps when you have some stud linebackers that they have. They've been really versatile and able to adjust well to a lot of different systems. What I don't think I've seen this team do well yet is pressure the quarterback. They have had moments in individual plays where, like, yeah, it worked, but this hasn't been a front four that has consistently gotten to the quarterback, gotten hands in his faces, and made things difficult for, you saw that Louisiana Tech. They got a lot of pressure. J.D. Head threw a bunch of interceptions that ended up sealing the game. The defense got there. Yeah. It was the pressure that got there in the final game last season. So I'm kind of circling because I think it's interesting. We'll kind of go over into the USC territory a little bit now, but this is a matchup where because there's so much turnover, the offensive line for USC has a couple guys coming back. D-line has some new faces. I want to see how does this Rice front, which has a couple 300-pound guys and a couple, Akin is getting NFL scouts coming to town every week to go look at him. You put DeBraylon Carroll, Isaiah Floyd next to each other. You put Trey Schumann as a rotational piece. That's wonderful. Josh Piercy is going to be a problem. Where do you put KK Orji on the field? Blake Banish would have been starting for this team, 2 years ago because he's that good. He's just raw. He's had a great spring and fall. So I think that's interesting. This matchup I'm kind of circling against USC. How is Rice going to do in the trenches? Because I think if you can hold your own in the trenches, that mitigates a lot of problems down the field because USC has speed.
Yeah, I'm worried about that matchup because when you do look at the USC personnel coming back, I had one passive-aggressive shot, one aggressive shot, so now it's time for another passive-aggressive shot, Matthew. If we had a depth chart, we could tell you more specifically, but assuming that their All-American left guard, Andrew Voorhees, is there, he's an NFL guy, so him up the middle against Quentin Titt, a guy we didn't talk about yet, the Abilene Christian transfer, who's a grown man.
We got too many guys to talk about.
Yeah, that was another one that just dawned on me. So having DeBraylon Carroll mixed in there, Quentin Titt, how do they match up with a guy like Andrew Voorhees? But they've also got Nelson on the offensive line. They've got Cortland Ford is their left tackle as well. So those are the pieces we assume will be in those same spots. We hope for their personal well-being. We hope there's no injury, but just assuming that they're back and they're healthy, that's where they should be. Obviously, that's where games are won or lost. The skill guys can get some of all the glory a lot of the times, but that's going to tell the story of this if they can get some pressure. Myron Morrison, Coach mentioned in his presser yesterday, so I feel free to elaborate. But Myron Morrison, remember he got the targeting in the Louisiana Tech game, so he has to sit out the first half. So Andrew I coming in there, linebacker, they've got Conti, the Rutgers transfer. Can they get that early pressure if the Rice defensive line can tie up with that pretty good above average offensive line for USC? If they get some early pressure there, that could give me some hope for them Owls.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. And I think, as we kind of piece this together, this is a note that was passed over from USC that I thought was particularly interesting. Returning 71 players from the 2021 squad, that sounds pretty good from a big number, but 37 lettermen, which is basically the key pieces, the guys who were playing. It's a ton of new faces. So we'll start kind of with offense. Gary Bryant Jr., leading receiver, he's coming back. Obviously, kind of the names to know. We're going to run through the transfer portal pieces. The stars, if you will, are mostly that they've added from the portal are mostly on the offensive side of the football. We have Caleb Williams coming in from Oklahoma. This is Elite 11. This is a guy who's going to be a top 5 draft pick in the NFL. He's getting all the accolades and fared pretty well at his time as Oklahoma. A little raw, but worked with Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
He's going to be good. This is the best quarterback Rice is going to face all year and might have faced under Bloomgren. Kind of going through my Rolodex so far, but that's probably true.
First snap, it's my 11th season of doing this. I don't think they would have seen a quarterback like this, even the years, playing Texas those times and playing Houston, going through the mental Rolodex too. Yeah, Caleb Williams is legit. You remember, I don't know if someone of your ilk, Matthew, watches the Texas-Oklahoma game, but you remember last year's when Williams just jumped in there at the half and he changed everything, gave Oklahoma a little hope for that offseason, and he was one of the bigger storylines of the offseason when he was going to transfer. But, yeah, he's got a lot of weapons, not to make this a Caleb Williams podcast, but he's got a lot of weapons out there, revamped backfield, and, the best receiver in college football last year, Jordan Addison, coming that our guy George elaborated on yesterday. So not only the best quarterback, maybe Rice has seen in a decade and a half or so, but maybe the best receiver or combination depth of receivers. But they're still working together. So Rice is getting them in that first game. So I'm fascinated to watch that matchup.
They've had 29 practices together was the number I've gotten so far, which sounds good on paper, but you talk about the number of times that Wiley Green has thrown to Brad Rosner in his career, a bit more than 29 scrimmage sessions, even with folks banged up. So, yeah, Caleb Williams, name to know. Jordan Addison transferred in from Pitt. Blitnikoff, winner, that had 1,700 yards and 15 touchdowns or something ridiculous. Yeah. He's very good. Mario Williams coming with Caleb Williams from Oklahoma, another receiver that's going to be out there. And then two names in the running game that I think we're going to see, no depth chart, but we're guessing, intelligent guessing right here. Well, as intelligent as we can be, JP, guessing. Travis Dye, multi-year starter coming in from Oregon, and you got Austin Jones from Stanford, those two. So this is an offense. We talked about the offensive line, a lot of returners, we think, coming back up front, but the skill positions, it's portal plucking. And we're probably going to see, and this is what I thought was interesting from Bloom yesterday. He mentioned we just watched a lot of Oklahoma. We watched a lot of these guys' individual highlights because that's what all you got at this point. So that's the offense, we think, for USC. Flipping over to the defense, this is where I think things are interesting. And we talked a lot at the beginning of the show, JP, about the Rice offense and kind of its evolution and how we expect it to grow. That makes me intrigued for the USC defense because they brought in some guys on defense. If you look at just a grand total number of transfers, USC brought in 24 transfers. 12 of them were on the defensive side of the football, a couple specialists, so more defensive transfers than anything else. But these are guys like Mekhi Blackman from Colorado, Tyrone Taleni, Kansas State, Earl Barquette from TCU, guys that were good at their respective schools, but this is not a Jordan Addison. They didn't go pull the best corner in the country. This isn't a Caleb Williams. They don't have the best defensive end in the country coming in. These are guys who were highly regarded and played well at their previous stops, enough for Lincoln Riley to want them. But this is not the, your all-star studded team on defense for USC. And this was their side of the ball they struggled with last year. So some opportunities here. What do you know about, or what do you think you know about the USC defense?
Since we're reliving my good old days again, one of my favorite quotes of all time is, I know I don't know, and it's more apropos here. Legendary high school football coach John Outlaw said that, the late, great John Outlaw. They do have Tuli Pulotu, 2-year defensive lineman starter coming back. So we flipped it earlier talking about the great studs on the USC offensive front. Tui Pulotu is their rock in the middle there. You're right. But it's Alex Grinch. You look at what Alex Grinch did for Washington State when he went to Ohio State, when he went to OU, and now he went west too, young man. So the big thing, Coach, wanted to get the correct verbiage because Coach was talking about the other matchups they've had in the past that he and Marcus Tuiasosopo, they played Alex Grinch when he was at Washington State a number of times, but he's really good, does a good job with movement on the defensive side, and he doesn't get outnumbered in the passing game. So that'll be a good chess match between Marcus Tuiasosopo and Alex Grinch. Can they create those mismatches? Take a number, the Rice secondary against that USC offense. That's going to be another really fascinating matchup that I'm sure we'll be texting in the breaks at half and after the game and talking about in this forum next week. It's not one game does not this season make, but it is the two. I'll end with this. I know we're wrapping up out of time. Matthew, we talked about this with Bloom Monday night at Acme Oyster House. Shameless plug, Coach's Show. We're streaming it, by the way, this year too. Think about it. The two of the three biggest storylines in college football this offseason. Lincoln Riley going to USC, which put OU fans. Don't you think the Owls have some fans in Norman this week, Brother Bartlett? But him going west, and then with the Big Ten shuffling that Lincoln Riley, he claims he didn't know about it before he moved over there. We'll take him at his word. And then you drop our Rice Owls right in the middle of two of the biggest storylines. It's delicious. I've already been fired up. I started out fired up. I'm ending up fired up. I can't wait, Matthew. I don't know if I answered your question, but there's my talking. I'm done.
You did, but you got to pace yourself because we got a couple more days before kickoff. We got USC coming up. It should be fun. I know I'm certainly – there's always excitement when you come to the season opener, but there's something this year about just this Rice team feels different. The roster, it feels like it's at a different place. And you're always optimistic. This is the time of the season where you're more optimistic than you ever – everybody in the country, except for Nebraska fans. Nebraska fans is really happy right now because most of their teams are 0-0. They've talked all spring and summer about how this is the year. It's a great time. This is going to be an interesting team. It's going to be intriguing storylines to follow. We don't know a lot about USC. We don't know a lot about this Rice team. We think, we want, we hope, we pray, all of the above. So we'll see. We'll be back next week to look ahead at the next game on the schedule, and we'll go from there. And before we know it, we'll be right back in the thick of things in mid-season form. But, yeah, make sure you check out the Coaches Show Monday nights. Roost Pod will be dropping probably shortly today, but probably Tuesday, Wednesdays this season to kind of hopefully recap the game that just happened. So you'll get both from us, Coaches Show and Pod recapping, and this show looking ahead. We'll have you covered all year. So until this week, or until next week, it is this week.
Yeah, this week
we'll
too.
Sign off. Take care. Rice fight.
Never dies. Give me my depth chart, Lincoln. I want it.